The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. The Supreme Court yesterday upheld Indiana's law requiring abortion providers to bury or cremate fetal remains, but left the lower court rulings intact, which invalidated a broader measure which would prevent a woman from having an abortion based on a fetus's gender, race, or genetic disorder. So this actually goes back to then Governor, now Vice President Mike Pence, passed in 2016 in Indiana. And the law prohibited what the state called discriminatory abortion. So if there's some characteristic of the fetus, like gender or race or a Down syndrome diagnosis or some other congenital condition, you would be banned from using that as the basis for an abortion. And supporters of the measure said that the law was responding to medical developments that weren't contemplated at the time that Roe v. Wade in the 1970s was made law. Lower courts blocked the discriminatory provision. The Supreme Court left those provisions, those rulings intact, which means the state can't enforce that part of the law. So that is good. Less good are these requirements about having to require fetal remains be buried or cremated. And, you know, Pat, this is just one piece. This is a big fight now, okay? Ever since Trump and his Supreme Court picks, this is a big fight, and it's going to be a big fight for a while. And this is just one small piece of that.
Yeah, well, I think the part about requiring abortion clinics to bury or cremate fetal remains, that's probably just to appeal to people's emotions, to make it seem as though these are actual babies who are being killed, and try to convince people into the anti-abortion side. I think that's all it is there, and I don't know if that's going to significantly play a part. I don't know if that's going to change anyone's minds on the topic of abortion. The other decision made by the court, though, I find a little bit more interesting. Like, should a woman be able to decide whether or not she wants an abortion based on the race of the baby or based on the gender of the baby, or if it has a condition like Down syndrome? I think that's a little bit more up to debate. Yeah,
I just actually recently had a conversation during my trip, which we talked about yesterday, which generated so many interesting responses from people. I had a conversation with a few people who were just at the wedding about exactly those questions. Would you, if you're a woman, or would you want your partner, if you're a man, to have an abortion if you were to find out that she was carrying a child that had Down syndrome, for example, or other conditions? And even though everybody in the group was pro-choice, there were still disagreements about these medical questions and those particular decisions. And I understand that. I mean, that makes sense. And that seems to be, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be a little bit less ideologically driven and more driven by, I don't know, something else. People who are on the political left and are pro-choice still seem to come down not all on the same place on the issue of abortions related to medical conditions that are determined.
Well, I suppose maybe because it has some overlap with like the medical, designer babies idea that one day we'll be able to choose exactly what features we want from our offspring, what kind of height and eye color and gender we want them to have. And, this is in a sense similar to that, because even though you're not going through and checking off what you'd like out of your offspring, you can make a decision based on whether you want to abort the fetus or not, based on those traits that they may or may not have.
I understand.
So I think there is some overlap there.
There's some overlap there, even though we are talking about significantly different things. And in any case, Supreme Court decision split in terms of what we like, what we don't like for the selection of simple terms. And this is just one micro decision, although it will impact many people, in what is a very broad reinvigoration of the fight against abortion from the American religious right. There has been a mass stabbing in Japan. At least 2 victims are dead, including an 11-year-old girl. 17 others were injured. This was near Tokyo yesterday morning, Tokyo time. A man who was killed was in his 30s. Japanese broadcaster NHK quoted officials saying that a knife-wielding man attacked a group of elementary school kids as they were boarding a school bus in the morning. The suspect reportedly stabbed himself in the neck before he was detained, and he has died from his injuries, according to the broadcaster. So once again, this raises these questions of gun versus knives. You have those who say it doesn't matter what you do with guns, even if guns are hard to get. People want to commit mass acts of violence, they are going to be able to. My argument has been, well, they will be able to commit an act, but it is going to be far less deadly. And, look at this case. If you had an individual with some of the firearms that have been used in mass shootings in the United States over the last 5 years, it's very probable that at this close range with all these kids, more than 2 people would have ended up dead. That doesn't make the fact that 2 people died any less tragic, doesn't make the action any less vile, but it seems to me to be an undeniable reality.
Yeah, and if you look at it, it's 2 people killed, 17 injured. I'd imagine if it was a mass shooting instead of a mass stabbing, there would have been more people killed, because I think it's a lot more likely that some people will die from a gunshot wound than being stabbed. I think you're more likely to survive that. And so, yeah, I think that mass stabbings, if we were to eliminate guns, they would still happen for sure. And maybe they would happen more so because people who want to commit heinous acts would choose a knife instead of a gun. But we know it's just going to be far less deadly. And that's ultimately a step in the right direction.
It's a good thing. I mean, it's like, the pro-gun right will sometimes pull people who are in favor of more restrictions on firearms into these sort of semantic and circular arguments about, do you not care about violence in general? Do you only care about guns? Like, no, we care about violence in general, but if you tell me, would you rather 15 people be injured or 15 people die? I'm not going around hoping people get injured, but I'd rather the injuries instead of the deaths.
Yeah, and it's also really hard to imagine living in a world without knives. Like, imagine we banned all the knives. How would we do our cooking? How would we do so many other things that we do day to day? And I would be able to imagine a world without guns. Like, it just, that's very simple. There wouldn't be hunting, I suppose. It would be difficult for law enforcement. Maybe that would be a reality we'd have to kind of deal with. But I could picture that reality much more so than one without knives.
Well, it's similar to when people say, well, cars also kill people. Yes, but the primary purpose of vehicles is just for transportation, right? And so the idea, you know what? I think people in the audience know about this line of reasoning, and we can sort of leave it at that. And I will mention, just because Japan has come up, producer Lewis is coming back from Japan presently, and I still have his vehicle parked near my place. I had to move it out of the driveway because, listen, people need to get in and out. Lewis's car can't monopolize my driveway the entire time he's in Japan. But everything went well. He said he had a great time. It was a fantastic food trip, and he is en route back, and it was not near this incident as far as I know.
I remember a couple months after Lewis left the David Pakman Show, we brought him on to the bonus show to talk about his life, some of the updates going on with him since he left. But it's been a while now. I think it's been well over 2 years since Lewis has been on the show. Maybe it's time to have him on for a full-length interview. That could be the interview segment for the day.
Yeah, that's a possibility. All about his trip to Japan. But actually, maybe more interestingly, maybe he could just call into the bonus show and tell us about his trip to Japan. I'll talk to him and see if we can get that going. I have a little bit of news related to Brian Kolfage, the guy who raised $20 million to privately build Trump's wall. He and a group of Trump supporters have built like a little piece of wall down near the U.S.-Mexico border. It is, of course, a really, really small piece. And he is saying that it is historic. The organization building it is called We Build the Wall Incorporated. And former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon is the chairman of the advisory board of Build the Wall. And according to him, the new private barrier would basically link 2 sections of existing fencing in a space where there is a gap. And I mean, does this mean they didn't get scammed, Pat? Does this mean that the people who donated 20 or 22 million no longer need to feel that they got scammed because a piece of the wall was built?
Maybe that was the goal here. Now Brian Kolfage may not have to face any legal troubles because part of the wall did get built, even though it's only a half of a mile, and he raised millions of dollars for it. I think this is all just to make people feel as if the wall is going up, to make people feel as if they're safer. I think that's, been the goal behind Trump's building of a wall or proposed building of a wall. And now this sort of like private GoFundMe thing taking over. It's not about facts. It's about feelings first.
Yeah, and I think what matters most is if you're Brian Kolfage and you've collected $22 million, people's feeling about whether they did or did not get scammed is a really important thing for you, because if they feel that they did get scammed, you might end up getting sued. Who knows what sort of problems you're going to have, even though the GoFundMe campaign rule or fundraising rules are pretty clear in terms of service. You're much better off if you're Brian Kolfage, if people feel as though you're doing the thing, even if it is, as you pointed out, laughably. I mean, half a mile of wall. We'll see ultimately what, my real question is, what's going to happen with all the money? Because I actually don't think they can get enough land available to even use up the full $22 million on building pieces of the wall. Who knows? Hopefully Trump will be gone, Pat, before this is all said and done.
And I'm just imagining, like, let's say I'm an undocumented immigrant. I want to cross the wall. I want to go from Mexico to the United States. And I come across this little fence thing and I decide, oh, well, I guess I can't really cross this barrier. What shall I do? I guess I have to walk half a mile in that direction so I can get around the fence. It seems kind of ridiculous. That's why the whole wall in general is ridiculous, because you can't build a wall across the entire border. There are going to be natural barriers between Mexico and the United States that prevents you from putting up any sort of wall because of environmental issues and all that stuff, like the Rio Grande. So if you can just go around the wall so easily, is it effective at all? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's one question about this strategy for preventing undocumented immigration, among like a dozen different questions that exist. And what really matters to Brian Kolfage is, can he keep the cash? Is he going to be able to keep the cash? That does it for today. New show, new bonus show tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.